Hello ladies and gentlemen, Top Hat Gaming Man here. I am still in the land down under here in Australia, and today I have decided to meet up with fellow YouTuber right here, Since Spacies. Yeah!
G'day and welcome to my humble abode, and it's glad to have you here.
Thank you, thank you. I'm really enjoying Australia so far, I must say. It's pleasant, it's very, very pleasant. Something I've recently been doing on my channel is I've been talking with people about basically about a little bit about the history of gaming and retro gaming in general across various countries. So therefore, for example, I recently talked with Top Hats and Champagne about German gaming. Guru Larry, we talked about British gaming. So yeah, I just wanted to get the lowdown essentially on what it's like in Australia. So let me start off by asking you the first question. What was the dominant gaming brands in the 1980s in your country, would you say?
Well, early 1980s, I should say, Atari was big and huge. Yeah, Coleco had a bit of a footing here at that stage, but it was arcades that were really killing it back then. It wasn't really the home consoles.
Got ya. Yeah. Coleco was pretty much non-existent, I'd say, in the UK. Okay. I think it was there in the background maybe, but it was very, very, very niche. What about microcomputers? Did they have much of an impact?
Commodore 64 was huge to a degree. Amstrad, but
Amstrad. That was my first Amstrad CPC.
But it wasn't something that everyone talked about in the schoolyards. Commodore 64 and later Amiga in the early 90s was, or late 80s I should say, definitely was the dominant gaming platforms in this country at that time as far as microcomputing goes.
So in the just in terms of microcomputing, but overall by the end of the late 80s, who was the dominant force, would you say?
Amiga was huge, but only because of the pirating.
Piracy was great, you've got to say.
Kept that platform alive and killed it. But Commodore 64 before it was huge. I think that, again, though, people were just copying and borrowing games, though that was what...
So do you reckon the Commodore was probably bigger than Nintendo and Sega at the time?
Yeah, it was more common. But the big hardcore gamers were going after the consoles. And buying into either Nintendo or Sega, the NES and the Master System. They were the two dominant platforms here in this country at that time.
Okay, gotcha. What about, let's move forward a little bit to the early 90s. Would you say by that point they'd fizzled out a little bit to microcomputers?
Amiga was still sort of holding its own.
Okay.
Up until about 93, 94. And the reason why I know that is because when I was working at the Gainsman, half their shop was dedicated to Amiga. When I started working there in 94, they started shrinking down the Amiga and PC started to expand from that point on.
Got to say, I visited the Gamesman Retro Games shop. It was a nice shop with a lot of stock, but I must say, from what I've seen thus far in Australia, collecting seems to be extremely expensive here.
Yeah, pretty heavy on the wallet, and just finding a place to buy any of that retro stuff is getting harder and harder now. It's really sad. Yeah,
definitely. Like I've travelled around a lot, as people on my channel would know. I'd say in the United Kingdom, we do not have many retro game stores. But you can still, if you're willing to do it, you can still find retro games pretty easily just by browsing Facebook groups, etc.
Well, Facebook, eBay's what's pretty much killed the hock shops or the pawn shops that we had running in this country. That's where I used to go to. Most of my Sega Saturn stuff was from hock shops. And some of it's actually worth quite a bit. Nice. Like a $15 game, I've seen one of them was now worth about $250.
Have you travelled to the United States much? Because I know you've done a bit of travel yourself.
I have been to the States. I didn't get a chance to see what their retro gaming scene was, but when I was in Canada, there was a shop that I saw in Vancouver. From one end of the wall to the other, you could timeline it from Atari right up to Xbox, and it was just crazy. Like, I couldn't get over how much of a range and choice they've got overseas.
It's crazy.
And then you come over back to Australia and it's tumbleweeds. It's really, really hard.
I have to say, like from looking for retro games in North America myself, like within Canada and the United States, there's literally retro game stores on every corner. Like I've been to small towns.
No, stop it.
Small towns with 3 stores per town. It's outrageous.
Killing me.
And they have, this is the funny thing as well, they have the audacity to claim that certain games are rare, but then they have these same games in all three shops in the town, and then they go to another shop, and then they've got the free games again, and nothing's bloody rare. They've got everything available. It's crazy.
I just saw someone post up on Twitter this morning, Super Mario Bros., the original NES in box, which, you know, granted that's hard to find, but not rare. $80 Australian.
Oh, yeah, I tell you. Oh, crazy.
Yeah, that was what, the second or one of the top 10 highest selling games of all time, but it's rare.
So I would say in England, I reckon perhaps for microcomputers catalysed the gaming industry and made it what it is today.
Yeah.
For example, we had the BBC Micro, for example, which it was in every school, so it gave people at a very young age, everyone basically had the opportunity.
I've got them on board.
To use a computer. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what would you say catalysed Australian gaming?
Well, everyone was just going on about Commodore 64. Zap magazine, Zap 64, I think it was called.
Okay.
That was like the magazine that you'd see all the kids on the school bus pulling out and reading and talking about swapping games and that. So I think Commodore 64 was one of the biggest influences in this country when it came to kids getting on board and programming. Even just typing up the loading command was enough to get them into the whole habit of input and something coming back from it. Yeah.
Like I said, when I was young, I had an Amstrad CPC, and I remember doing a little tiny bit of it then, but I was very young. So.
Yeah, I remember getting for the Sega SC3000, which was my first computer. Big long codes. Yep, that's the one.
I'll grab it.
Yeah.
There you go. Look at that, ladies and gentlemen.
And you'd be getting these big long codes of magazines, programming, and you'd have to type the whole lot, and there'd be one text out, and you'd have to retype the whole thing or look over it. So, and this was a rubber keyboard one, so that was really
like
hard
Spectrum,
to...
like a bloody Spectrum.
I hated typing on this thing. I did end up getting a hard keyboard one, but I haven't got that anymore. So I'm just glad to still have this one.
I've heard the people of the internet refer to these as dead flesh keyboards. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's about a good way to put it.
Analogy, yeah.
Good analogy, yeah. So, with gaming though, in the 80s, being that we didn't have internet, these things would get people together in groups. So we'd have a Sydney Sega Users Group, or SUG. Not the best name.
Bit of an odd name.
Yeah, SUG, but that's what it was called. And people would initially have it set up because they were really behind this particular computer. But there was a side group of us that were more interested in the Sega Master System, and then later on the Sega Mega Drive. And we would rent out a scout hall and have everyone set up their TVs, and that's how we socialised.
So would you say, actually, that's a bit odd, that's very different. Bloody clock! That's not going to bloody stop us though, bloody cuckoos, and there's lots of wildlife in this country. I've had to put up with all the time, about kookaburras, all sorts, so that's not going to stop us right now.
Alright, kick it
anyway,
back.
Yeah, keep it going. Anyway, Sega SC3000, that's really strange when you think about it. So Sega microcomputers, that's different.
It was very different. This one, you could also hook up cassettes. There was a cassette that was built especially for this, a player that is, and you had adventure games where you would type commands and have to visit different rooms and work out how to get out of that room. So basically, a type and click.
Would you say the Sega brand was fully established in Australia before the Mega Drive?
It got a footing, yeah. Because most people, when they think the very first Sega machine, they think the Sega Master System.
They
or
do.
the Mark III.
Peasants.
Yeah. But it's actually this one here that you're looking at, which was the very first one. And touching on Australia and how we pronounce Sega, they were advertising it back in 1984 as Sega, not Sega. There's an ad on YouTube somewhere, which I'll show one day, which actually shows how we were pronouncing it different to the rest of the world. And it was only until when I started working in Sega and we were getting demo material from Sega of America that we were like, oh, I think we're pronouncing it wrong. But we didn't correct it.
It's like one of those things, isn't it? Like I always get told off on YouTube a lot for calling it the Atari VCS, the Atari 2600.
2600.
Yeah, I know, but I call it the 2600 because I never saw any promotional material for the bloody thing, so I've always called it the 2600.
Yeah, it was advertised here as Atari 2600. I do distinctly remember
it could have very well been, but yeah.
But, whatever,
Pronunciation
tomato.
isn't important anyway,
No.
ladies and gentlemen. All accents are different.
And I call it SNES. I don't care what you say.
So do I.
Yeah.
So do I. And yes, it's outrageous that people complain about that and saying, "Oh, Super NES, that's what you're supposed to call it." I've never heard anyone call it that in England in my entire life, I must say. One more question regarding gaming history: was there any sort of video game crash in this country?
What's a video game crash?
Exactly. What is a video game crash? It's
Never
something I
happened.
keep hearing about
Yeah.
from all these American YouTubers. What was the video game crash?
It happened in that region, and
Just something in that
it's
region.
well documented. We all know about it. But here in Australia, companies like the Gamesman, which you visited just recently, they were starting up and going gangbusters at that time.
Yes, I actually read. This is a store what survived to this day, and from what I've read online, it was opened in 1982, which was 1 year before that mythical video game crash.
I
Apparently.
still don't know what you're talking about.
No, yeah, exactly. So yeah, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, to summarise, just basically just furthers the point really that there is a lot more to retro gaming in the 1980s than the NES.
Definitely.
So yes, like I said, Europe, it was all about the microcomputers and the Master System, and obviously there was a few countries what was leaned towards the NES, but on the whole, it was more Sega and microcomputers. Brazil, again, that was mainly.
I've got a
So,
video,
yeah.
I've got a video which showed off a Mega Drive, and Brazil's like the top watched
Exactly.
country for that video.
Exactly.
It's still today they're still fascinated with that system.
So yeah, so you've got two continents: South America dominated by Sega. By the early 90s, Europe dominated by Sega. Australasia dominated by Sega. So that's
Definitely.
3 continents that were just completely dominated by Sega, compared to Nintendo, who dominated, I'd say, North America, and perhaps, well, they dominated Japan. So yes, a continent and a country.
This is not dissing on Nintendo.
No,
I love
not
Nintendo.
at
In
all.
fact,
I
while
love
working
Nintendo.
on the Sega hotline, I actually dragged the Super Nintendo into the Sega hotline, and while answering calls on Alex Kidd, I'm playing Street Fighter. So yeah.
I just want to say I grew up with the Super Nintendo, but being a Brit, it was always like the lovable underdog console. That's what it felt like to me. Anyway.
Whereas that was not the case
It was,
elsewhere.
yeah, I didn't know that, but that's how it felt, I must say. Like when I got Mega Man X, for example, that felt like a bloody hidden gem. I felt like I discovered something. So yes, anyway, that's what we've had to say about that. So yes, cheerio, ladies and gentlemen.
Bye guys.